So we have this quantifier verb phrase method, and the idea is we split our sentence into the quantifier phrase and the verb phrase. We then find the quantity word is going to give us the quantifier and the connective inside of it, and then we're just left with the noun phrase and the verb phrase, which we then symbolize in the appropriate positions. And we can use this method to symbolize complex sentences, complex quantified sentences of natural language. So let's see some examples of doing that. So let's look at this sentence. We have every large cat meows. This is LR 3.6 LRS 103. So you can find that in the module if you want to follow along, which would probably be a good idea. So if we look at this sentence, we see, well, it's got two parts. It's got meows, that's the verb, and then every large cat, that's the quantifier phrase. And every is our quantity word, our quantifier, which hooks up with large cat. So every large cat is a unit made up of every attached to large cat, and then this whole thing, every large cat, hooks up with meows. So our method says, okay, there's our verb phrase, and there's our quantifier phrase. Then it says, what's the quantity word? And the quantity word is every. So whenever we have an every, we want to put in a universal and then a conditional. And then in the antecedent, we symbolize the noun phrase. So we'll put X is a large cat. Everything that's like this, and then we'll say is also like that. So then we'll put the verb phrase there. So quantity word gives us the quantity word every gives us the universal and the conditional. And then this large cat is a unit and the noun phrase that's attached to the quantifier, and that always gets symbolized in the antecedent. And the verb phrase, which is what's left over, gets symbolized in the consequent. So meows is just atomic M. What's going on here? Let's try that again. MX. X is a large cat. Well, how do we symbolize that? We'll say two things. X is a cat, which is going to be CX, and X is large, and that's LX. And there's our symbolization. And so what's going on here is the universal every gives us the for all X, the arrow, and then all the little X's. Large cat is the noun that the quantity word every is hooked up to. So large cat is going to be symbolized in the antecedent, and meows, and we do that with the C or the C, the and the L, and then meows, the verb phrase, is symbolized in the consequent. So there we go. Good. And it doesn't matter. The reason this is saying correct equivalent is because you could symbolize it as LX and CX. Good. Let's take a look at another example. 104. Every cat meows or hisses. So let's think about how this breaks up. We have every, and every is attached just to cat. So in this case, our quantity phrase is every cat. And then we have meows or hisses is left over. This is a complex verb phrase now, right? It's not just meows, it's meows or hisses. And that's a grammatical unit. So we've got three pieces. We have a quantity word, the noun phrase that attaches to the quantity word, and a big verb phrase. So every, again, gives us a universal and then a conditional. Now the noun that attaches to the every is just cat, so we'll symbolize X is a cat, and that's in the antecedent, so CX. Here, the verb phrase is meows or hisses, and we say X and then the verb phrase, so meows or hisses. Well, X meows or hisses, that's an or, it's a disjunction of X meows and X hisses. So again, the every gives us the universal quantifier and the conditional, and then all the little X's. The cat is the noun that the quantity word attaches to build this thing, and so cat by itself goes in the antecedent. And then we say the verb phrase goes, and then it's big, goes in the consequent, and we symbolize meows or hisses as X meows or X hisses. And this should make sense. What does this say? Each thing, if it turns out that it's a cat, then what is it like? It also does one of these two things. It does this or it does that. So there we go. That's a symbolization where we have a complex verb phrase. Let's look at another one. Every cat hisses if it's bothered. So this might be a little bit tricky, but we can do this. So let's look at it. Again, here's our quantity word every, right there at the beginning of the sentence. And what does it attach to? Again, it's just that simple phrase, noun phrase, which is just the noun, cat. And that leaves us hisses if it's bothered, left over. That's what we're saying each of these things are like. Each of them is like this. It hisses if it's bothered. So we're going to treat this as a big, fat verb phrase. So we're going to treat this as just one big verb phrase. And we know where the verb phrases go. They go in the consequent. So every, again, gives us a universal and then a conditional. The noun that the every is hooked up to is cat, so we just have x is a cat in the antecedent, cx. And then we're saying that this is the verb phrase. Every cat is like this. So we're going to move this down to the consequent, x, and then hisses if it's bothered. What's the it? Well, it's x. So x hisses if x is bothered. Okay, that's a conditional. Now let's think about how we symbolize conditionals. Whatever comes after the if is the antecedent. So x is bothered is the antecedent, and that's bx. And then x hisses, that's the leftover, so that's the consequent. And so we have x hisses. So every gives us the universal and the conditional. Cat gives us the C. Hisses if it's bothered gives us this conditional inside in the consequent of the main conditional. Again, because this is we're treating this as a complex verb phrase. Good. Let's take a look at an even more complicated one. Here's another one. Every large cat purrs only if it's petted. So again, we just have our quantity word every there, and we know that's going to give us a universal and conditional already. And then we've got, what are our parts? Well, we have a large cat. That's a noun phrase, and that's what every is hooked up to build this phrase, every large cat. So we're going to have a large cat in the antecedent. X is what? X is a large cat. Those are the things we're going to talk about. We're going to say all of them, all of these things, we're talking about these, we're saying all of them are what? They're like this, and that's going to be our verb phrase. So there we go, right? The universal gives us the every gives us the universal quantifier, and it gives us the conditional and the variables x and all the x's. Large cat then being the noun phrase that the quantity word is attached to gets to go lock, stock, and barrel in the antecedent, and the remainder, which is the verb phrase, gets to go into the consequent, and we'll change that it there also into x. We're saying x purrs if and only if x is petted. Okay. So x is a large cat. Well, that's a conjunction, right, of x is large, lx, and x is a cat, cx. And then, so that's done. And then x purrs only if x is petted. Well, only if, gives us a conditional. It basically means then. Whatever comes after the only if is the consequent, and the rest of it is the antecedent. So we'll say it's a conditional. X purrs goes in the antecedent. Purrs is symbolized as nx. And then x is petted goes in the consequent, and petted is symbolized as ox. So this is getting pretty big, right? I mean, it's a universal, and then a conditional, and then inside the conditional is a conjunction on one side, and then conditional on the other, and that's a pretty complicated sentence. But we know how to break it apart. The every is what's giving us the universal and the conditional and all the x's. This is the noun phrase part, large cat, and this is the verb phrase part, purrs only if it's petted. Right? And so all the different pieces of this really big sentence, which has a very different tree than this sentence, nonetheless correspond to each other, correspond with parts of the logical sentence. The every, universal, large cat is our noun phrase, goes in the antecedent, purrs only if it's petted, being the verb phrase, goes in the consequent. There we go. We have a correspondence between the pieces of this and the pieces of that. Very nice. And let's look at just one more. Do every cat meows if and only if it's not happy. And I hope you're getting a handle for this right now. And this might look kind of complicated because there's that biconditional in there, that if and only if. And how are we going to handle that? We're going to handle it in the same way we've helped with everything else. Quantity word, noun, the rest is the verb phrase. So we know the quantity word every gives us a universal and a conditional. The noun that's attached to the quantity word is just cat. So x is a cat, cx. And this is the rest of it. That's our verb phrase, and the verb phrase goes in the consequent X meows if and only if X is not happy. Okay. How do we symbolize this? Well, it's if and only if. That's a biconditional. So biconditional, we'll put X meows on one side, and that's just MX, and we will put X is not happy on the other side. X is not happy, that's the negation of X is happy, and that's HX. And there we go. Again, this looks like, whoa, there's a biconditional. How do I handle it? Just the way we handle all the other complex verbs. Quantity word hooks up with the noun phrase, giving us that unit, and then this is the rest of the sentence. So the quantity word gives us the quantifier and that conditional, and the noun that the quantity word is hooked up with goes in the antecedent, and then this thing goes in the consequent. And then this we just symbolize as we would symbolize any old biconditional. It's a biconditional, make it a biconditional, and you're good to go. Okay? So those are a bunch of examples of how we can symbolize complex sentences using our quantifier verb phrase method. We find the quantifier, we find the noun or noun phrase that the quantifier is hooked up to, and then the rest of it is a verb or maybe a whole verb phrase, and then they each go in their places. The quantity word gives us a quantifier and then the next symbol, and negation if it's a no, that goes in one piece, that goes in the other, and then we just go to town on the pieces, symbolizing them. So I hope that's really helpful in your helping you to symbolize some of these more complex sentences. If you have any questions, do please let me know.